other invited guests, faculty members, Dr. Ian Thomas, the Secretary of Economics Association, Dr. Bose, the Head of the Department Economics, and my dear students. As you all know, Christ College is in the 60th year of its service to the nation and humanity. We are celebrating the Diamond Jubilee of this college this year. As part of the Diamond Jubilee celebrations, various departments are organizing many programs, seminars, and other projects as part of the Jubilee celebrations. Here, today we are in the seminar hall to have a talk on the economic aspects of Indian economy, which will be delivered by respected Dr. Aravind Subramaniam.
Today, as you all know, is a hectic day in two ways. Today we are having the admissions to the new students, to the new to the degree programs, and also some of the academicians are visiting. Apart from these, some of the academicians are visiting our college as part of the NAC visit. Not actual NAC visit, but in preparation for the NAC visit. So it's a hectic schedule. Even then, the Department of Economics, with the help of Dr. Ian Thomas, former member of our staff from the economics, they have arranged this extension lecture and interactive session. I congratulate the head of the department and all the faculties of economics department for organizing this function, because it is through these functions our students will have an exposure to the ground realities of the economic levels. My duty here is to welcome the dignitaries for this function. Dr. Aravind Subramaniam, as I told you, is the Chief Economic Advisor of Government of India. Apart from that, he acts as a delegate, as member of the Chamber of Commerce, and he is the official of the Nationalized Bank, Trading Faculty, and other such organizations. We are really privileged to have him in our midst, to have a lecture and also to have an interaction with him. Because it's not easy to get such renowned personalities in a college like Christ College, which is in the faraway corner of Kerala, because it's not easy to reach here. From the nearest airport, there are 45 kilometers. You know the difficulty to reach here. So even though we are in this part, Dr. Aravind Subramaniam has taken pain to reach here, to be here, to deliver a lecture on behalf of the Department of Economics, all the staff members of the college, on behalf of Christ College. Sir, I extend you a warm welcome. Dr. Yamme Umman is the former head of the Department of Economics in John Mathai Center, which is the University Center for the Post-Graduation Programs in Economics and Management Studies. Even in his older age, is ready to be with us for this function. Sir, on behalf of the Economics Department and the college and all those who are present here, I extend you a warm welcome. Professor Dr. Irudayarajan is professor in CDS, one of the prestigious institutions under JNU. He is the most sought after guide in the research field also. Sir, we extend you a warm welcome to our midst for this program. It is none other than Dr. E.M. Thomas, who organized this program with the partnership with the Economics Department. That shows he still loves Christ College, because even after his retirement, he is here. He is here to bring such renowned personalities to our college for the benefit of our students, not only that of the Economics Department, but of the all departments, allied departments. I welcome you, sir, to this program. Dr. Bose, the head of the department, a humble man who prefers to be seated among the audience, not on the dais. So, Dr. Bose, I congratulate you for organizing this program and invite you for this function. It's a formality to invite him because he is the head of the department. Other invited guests are here. Your presence enrich this program. I welcome you all, dear sirs. And there are invited faculty members from other colleges, students from other colleges, and students from other departments on behalf of Christ College and on behalf of the organizing committee of this program. I extend you a warm welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Father. Dr. Aravind Subramanian, an Indian economist, is the current Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, having taken charge of the position on 16th October 2014. He is also the Dennis Weatherstone, a Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development. His award-winning book, Eclipse: Living in the Shadow of China's Economic Dominance, was published in September 2011 and has printed 130,000 copies worldwide in 4 languages. Foreign Policy magazine named him as one of the world's toppest 100 global thinkers in 2011. In the same year, India Today magazine named him one of the top 30 masters of the mind in India over the last 30 years. He is a columnist for India's financial dailies such as Business Standard and Indian Express and contributes regularly to the UK daily The Financial Times. He has worked in the research department of International Monetary Fund, the GATT, during the Uruguay round of trade negotiations and taught at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He has written on India, growth, trade, development, institutions, aid, climate change, oil, intellectual property, World Trade Organization, China, and Africa. He is the author-editor of 5 books, including India's Turn, Understanding the Economic Transformation in 2008, and Greenprint, a new approach to cooperation on climate change with Aditya Matu. He has also published widely in academic and other journals, including the American Economic Review, Review of Economics and Statistics, Journal of International Economics, Journal of Monetary Economics, Journal of Public Economics, Journal of Economic Growth, Journal of Development Economics, Oxford Review of Economic Policy, International Monetary Fund Staff Papers, Foreign Affairs, World Economy and Economic and Political Weekly. Dr. Subramanian obtained his undergraduate degree from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, his MBA from the Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad, and his MPhil and DPhil from the University of Oxford. Now, I call upon Aravind Subramanian sir to deliver the keynote address on Indian Economy and Economic Survey 2015-16.
Reverend Dr. Jose Tekken, who's leaving now to handle admissions, I'm told. Today is admissions day. So Dr. Tekken, Professor Uman, Professor Irday Rajan, Mr. Thomas, Professor Bose, head of the department. I'd like to express my sincerest gratitude and thanks for so kindly and graciously inviting me to come here. You know, it seems like a long way from Delhi, but actually just to see all of you here, you know, makes it such a wonderful and rewarding experience already, just to see all of you here. I'm going to make a presentation on the economic survey, and I want to give you a bit of background about that. But before I begin, let me say that you know, I would like all of you to feel free at the end to ask any questions that you want. You know, it can be about economics, it can be about anything else. So feel free to ask questions. You know, I look forward to interacting, you know, closely with you after my presentation. And I'm wondering how much time I should speak. As long as, you know, I've never had such an open invitation to bore. It's like a license to bore you for as long as I want. So I'm going to take advantage of that. So the economic survey is a document produced by the economic division in the Ministry of Finance. And I have with me two very close and good colleagues here, Dr. Abdul Karim and Dr. Anthony Syriac, who have been closely involved in, you know, in this document along with other colleagues of mine. So they should also feel free to contribute as and when the need arises. So this is a document that's produced every year. It's actually presented to Parliament the day before the budget is presented. It's an important document. It's meant to carry the views and analysis of you know, the Chief Economic Advisor and the Economic Division of the Ministry of Finance. And so, you know, it's meant to give you a sense of where the economy has been and where the economy is headed over the next year and in the medium term as well. So when you know, this is the second economic survey that we produced. When we did the first economic survey, what I decided was that, you know, I'd like to take this document to, you know, wherever I could all over India with my colleagues, so that, you know, to give you a sense of what this document contains, you know, why it's important, what are the issues it addresses. And I remember last year around this time, I was in Srinagar, where we were making a similar presentation, and the man who introduced me was the finance minister, Dr. Hasib Drabu and then he turned around to me, and I'm going to turn around to you and ask you the question that he asked me. He turned around to me and said, "Do you know who presented the first economic survey in Parliament?" So let me ask you that question. Any guesses for who presented the first economic survey to Parliament? Any guesses? I'll take 3 guesses. Huh? A very good guess, Dr. John Mathai. I mean, it's slightly, it's a good guess. It's a very parochial guess, given that he's a fellow Malayali. Very close, but not quite right. Any other guesses? Huh? Shanmugam Chetty, next state, still South India, but a very good guess, still not right. But you're all kind of very close. One last guess. Huh? you can't think beyond the Vindhyas, I can see, you know, T.T. Krishnamachari. Actually, Dr. L.K. Jha, all the way you've gone up to, yeah. So actually, the answer is that the man who presented it was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Actually, he presented this. So you know, in some ways, it tells you that. So when I heard this, actually, I was really humbled, and because you know it has such an illustrious tradition that our first Prime Minister presented this. So it makes you realize that you have to take this job very seriously and give it everything that you have, because you're merely inheriting a very, very sacred tradition in India. So the economic survey, what it is that it has basically, it used to be one document which was backward looking. It said, what is it that the economy has done in the last year? And what used to happen was that there used to be one chapter which was forward looking. So when I took this job, what I decided to do was to break it up into 2 volumes. The top one? Okay. So shall we move to the next slide? So the economic survey comes in 2 volumes. By the way, we've brought about 25 copies from Delhi. So I think that as many colleges are present here, they could share it equally. We've got 25 copies, so you could take it to your libraries and keep it. So the second volume is talks about where the Indian economy has been in the last 1 year. The first volume is forward-looking. It talks about important policy issues, many of which I'm going to cover in this talk today. But the one point I want to emphasize is that this economic survey is a document that I strongly believe should be a fount of ideas for policy making and policymakers. So we try and invest a lot of time and effort into getting data from all over the Indian government, elsewhere, and we try and analyze this data in a way that can be useful to policymakers. So for students, the thing that I would like you to focus on is think about what is it that we do here, how we do it. And it's not very complicated stuff. It's very simple analysis of data. And that's what we try and do, and try and focus on some really important policy issues, which, some of which I'll briefly touch upon. Depending upon how bored you're getting and how my voice is doing, I'll cover about 4 or 5 topics. But just to give you a sense of, how these things are done, what is it we focus on, how do we do our job, and then, how we bring to bear, all kinds of international experience from other countries, other time periods in Indian history, how we try and bring it all together, to help policy making in India. So next slide, please. So as I said, volume 1 is analytical, it's forward-looking, and actually we do try and prescribe policy in this. And then the second volume, it covers all the sectors of the Indian economy, and it's really very, very rich in having all the data and that you need. It's a repository of information about the Indian economy. Okay, so in this survey, there were 3 broad themes. One was on the macroeconomic situation and the outlook. Every survey has to talk about the macroeconomy. How is growth doing? How is inflation doing? How is our external situation doing? How is our fiscal deficit doing? So we want to analyze all of this, both with respect to the recent past, but also some estimate of how the economy is going to do going forward. Then we had a whole set of chapters on what we called structural reform. What are the reforms that the economy has undertaken, that the government has undertaken? and what are the areas where, you know, structural reforms could be undertaken going forward. For example, we had a chapter, what we called, you know, the exit problem, why it's easy to enter Indian industry and Indian manufacturing, but it's very difficult to exit, to leave the sector. And then we spoke about agriculture, fertilizer, the power sector, trade, labor markets, and so on. And then we had a third section on the state. How do you strengthen the Indian state? So, one question, does India tax too much, too little, or just about right? So that's a question I'm going to, you know, spend a little bit of time on. Second, you know, we always talk about subsidies for the poor, but do we also give a lot of subsidies for the middle class and the rich? If so, how much? Where? And so that's something that we, you know, spent a lot of time getting data to talk about, and so we call this, you know, bounties. It's like, you know, a different way of saying subsidies for the well-off, because, you know, the Prime Minister often says that, you know, when we give money to the poor, we call them subsidies, but when we give money to the rich, we call them incentives. So even our language in this is very skewed, and I hope all the Marxists here will appreciate the fact that we are, you know, very balanced between the poor and the rich in our treatment. So we have also a chapter on mother and child. You know, what are the issues related to the health of the mother, the health of the child, how it affects the prospects for that person when the child becomes old. How does he enter the labor force? How good or low or high is his or her productivity? And what can be done to improve that by way of what government action should be taken? And then we have a last section which we call JAM. You know, in last year's economic survey, we introduced this notion of JAM called Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and Mobile. You know, the three technologies that are coming together to make, to do a lot of very exciting things in the Indian economy, including, for example, giving subsidies directly to the poor by reducing leakages, reducing corruption, eliminating duplication, and so on. So we have a chapter on JAM as well. So I'm going to touch upon a few of these, and then you know, depending on how it goes, then we can take questions and so on. Yeah. I have to apologize in advance. There's no chapter on migration, and my apologies to Professor Rudrarajan. But let me say that we are making amends in the next economic survey. I think we'll have a fair amount on this. And of course, Professor Oomen is an expert on you know, federal finance and issues like that. Last year, we had an extensive discussion of that because of the 14th Finance Commission. This year, there's still some interesting things about the state, which I hope you'll find interesting. Let's talk about that. Huh? So Anthony, if you don't mind, shall we go to the next one? So, next slide. So the first question, or one of the things that the survey asks is, what is India's medium-term potential growth rate? Is it 3%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? And how should we think about, how do we calculate India's growth rate? Now remember, the famous Professor Raj Krishna, who was of course a friend of Professor K.N. Raj as well, he had this famous term called the Hindu growth rate. The Hindu growth rate is basically India growing at about 3% forever and ever and ever. And so it was a slightly negative, pejorative term because it meant that, you know, India didn't grow very rapidly. I mean, it's a contrast with the, you know, the East Asian tigers who grew at, you know, 8 and 9 and 10% for a very long time. And so India was growing that. But of course, in 1980, around 1980, India broke with that. You know, from about 1980 onwards till today, India has been one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And of course, we're the fastest growing economy today in the world, you know, because the world economy is slowed down. But for about 35 years, we've been not the fastest, but a very rapidly growing economy. So if I were to ask you, how fast have we been growing since 1979-80? Can anyone give me a sense of what roughly that number will be? Because before 1980, we were growing at 3%. That was the Hindu growth rate. Now, any guesses? 7%? Very close. So we've been growing at about 6 to 6.5% for about 35 years. And of course, in the last 2 years, we've been growing at over 7% and amongst the highest in the world, which is, of course, a source of great confidence in the economy. When the rest of the world is not growing so well, we're growing at that. But we've been growing at 6.5 for a long time. So the question is, going forward, how fast can we expect to grow? 6, 8, or 10, or 12 maybe, or we go back. And so we did this analysis. Now, the way we did this analysis was, there's some very famous set of papers recently that argue that countries, the richest countries, are those that have the strongest institutions. Institutions that will make sure that, for example, investment comes into the country, institutions that will ensure that contracts between individuals are sacred, institutions to ensure that the judiciary functions, institutions to ensure that the bureaucracy will deliver, like good health, good education, and so on. So a whole bunch of so in some ways, the interesting thing about this argument is not that the private sector is the most important thing for development, long-run development. It is, but even prior to the private sector, in fact, even in order to get the private sector in, we need very strong and effective government institutions. So this thing suggests that that on the x-axis you have an index of democracy, how democratically developed a country is, and this is the long-run per capita GDP of a country. So just to give you a sense, today the per capita GDP of the United States is something like $56,000. India's per capita GDP, any guesses here? How much? So India's per capita GDP in purchasing power parity terms, that is, you adjust for the fact that cost of living can be very different. So you have to, increase India's GDP. So India's GDP is about $6,000 to $6,500 per capita GDP in purchasing power terms. And remember, the United States is about $56,000. So we're about 10 to 11% as rich, or the average Indian is 10 to 12% as rich as the average American. Yeah, and that's the frontier. So what this theory says is that the more democratically developed a country is, the better will be its long-run per capita GDP. And it's a very strong relationship. If you actually plot this relationship for about 170 countries, you'll find a very strong relationship. But this relationship, and the people who've developed this theory are very, very famous people. They're professors at Harvard and MIT and so on, and their book has sold millions of copies. But the one problem with this, so the one problem with this hypothesis is that there are two countries that don't fit that pattern. They are what is called outliers or exceptions to this relationship. So this is the relationship that says the more democratic you are, the richer you'll be in the long run. But India and China are exceptions. And they're exceptions in very interesting ways. China is not a democracy, and yet it's very rich. India is a democracy, and yet it's not as rich as it should be. So this is the big puzzle. How come India, which is so democratic, ideally if you were here, this should be your per capita GDP. And if you were here, this should be your per capita GDP. But actually, it's completely the opposite. So the question is why that's the case. And we have a lot of explanations for why that's the case. But what we did was to say, we said that in the long run, both countries will have to slowly, next slide please Anthony, next. So slowly over time, China will have to come to the line and India will have to come to the line. So that will have to happen over the next 15, 20 years. So what does that mean for growth? And we calculated that. Next slide, please. So what we said was that, in a sense, India's potential growth rate between now and 2030 is going to be somewhere between 8 and 10%, and China is actually going to be between 4 and 6%. China has been growing at about 10% for 35 years. So China's growth rate has to slow down, whereas India's growth rate will have to slow up. And partly it's because of all the economic reforms that India has been doing, including under this government. But it's also partly because India is so poor and its institutions are relatively good that it's just a matter of time before we converge and become a normal country like any other country. So one of the first takeaways from the survey is that India's growth rate, which is today about 7 to 7.5%, will be between 8 and 10% in the medium term. And I think that's what's very exciting about India, that, I don't know what Anthony and Kareem, but certainly I grew up in the Hindu growth rate India, but all of you are going to grow up in an India with opportunities that are going to be that are going to reflect a very dynamic economy and an economy that grows at about 8 to 10%. Next slide, sorry, Anthony, please. So one of the themes that we speak about in this survey is called exit. Someone mentioned. I'm surprised that no one mentioned Rajagopalachari in the first set of guesses. Rajagopalachari, who was this, as you know, Indian, economist from Tamil Nadu, Chennai, he said that he had this famous expression, India is a license, quota, permit Raj. Basically what he meant was that Indian socialism was basically very, very stifling. To set up an industry, you have to get licenses, you have to get quotas to import anything. It was so difficult to do business in India because of this license, quota, permit Raj. But what he had in mind was that this related to, entering, i.e. setting up a factory, setting up a business, setting up a company. Entry, that's entry. But what we highlighted in the economic survey was also that we have actually similar problems in terms of exit. What do we mean by exit? That is, to give one example, we have 30 fertilizer firms in India. About 8 to 10 of them are producing at a very uncompetitive rate. So let's say the world price of urea is something like 18,000 rupees per ton, which is roughly what our efficient producers produce at. But many companies in India produce at 25,000, 30,000 rupees per ton. And the government subsidizes them to produce. So, question is, what should we do in this situation? What should we do to the inefficient firms in this? Any responses?
Exit.
Huh? Exit. But he's just reading out from the slide. Huh? Privatize, exit. Now, any students? I mean, I want to get a sense from you of, supposing we have a very inefficient firm. What do you think should happen to that firm? Should the government keep giving it money to keep it in business? Or should, as the professor said, should we somehow either privatize it or, slowly make it go out of business? What is the sense that you have? Students? Should we let it continue? Huh? No. So we shouldn't subsidize it? No? Why? I want to know why. Right. Yeah. So just think about it. This is one thing that, that's a very good response. I think that, one is that, remember that when we subsidize companies like this, which are very inefficient, it's very costly for the Indian economy. It's costly, as the teacher said there, because, it's very inefficient. It's also costly because the government is spending money which it could have spent on so many other things which are so important for, everyone in the economy, including the poorer sections of society. So that is why I think exit is very, very important for an economy. In fact, if you say, the two great historical books on economics are, one is by Adam Smith, of course, which is, he wrote this famous book called The Wealth of Nations. But there was another very great book by Joseph Schumpeter, and he has this very, very expressive term called the gale of the creative forces of destruction, or the gale of creative destruction. So, in a sense, you need, to run an economy, you need a creation, but you also need destruction. You also need exit, and it's very, very important. And what we documented in this chapter was, across the board in India, it is actually very, very difficult to exit. It's easy to enter. In fact, if you think about one of the, take the Vijay Mallya problem, for example. It's a great example of where, exit had proved to be very difficult until recently. We have, challenges in our banking system. Again, it's about how we get, inefficient firms, inefficient projects. Either we rehabilitate them and make them efficient, or somehow we find a way. And that's why in the last session of Parliament, the government passed what's called a bankruptcy law. And bankruptcy law is, precisely aimed at making exit more. So if you think about it, Rajaji many years ago identified one big problem, the problem of entry. But now, if we can solve the problem of exit, then we can get an economy that really works very well. So what we did in this chapter, next slide please, Anthony, is that we showed that the exit problem is pervasive in India. Fertilizers, public sector banks, discoms, and it's not just public sector, even the private sector. At the moment, we have all these infrastructure projects that are, either not taking off or being half implemented, again because, and it's very difficult to. Similarly, we have a situation, if you think about even agriculture, for example, we have specialized in cereals, and we've been very successful in white wheat and rice production. Now, in some ways, you could argue that we have to exit from cereals into pulses and other crops. So there too, if you think about it conceptually, we have a big exit problem in the Indian economy. So what we documented in this, and all my colleagues helped, we got data, on the fertilizer sector, on the power sector, on the banks, on the airline sector, got data to kind of show how big this problem was. And I'll give you some illustrative numbers when we come to the fertilizer chapter. For example, the cost of production. Which sector is this, Anthony? In the steel sector, for example, some private sector firms produce very inefficiently. So it's not just a public sector problem, it's also there in the private sector. Next slide. Yeah? So this is a kind of generic problem we spoke about, and then we ask, why is it so difficult to get exit? Why is it difficult? The answer that was given, the inefficient fertilizer firm should think, but why can't we do that? That's the big question. And what we say is that, often there are important interests that have, that prevent reform and exit. Often, I think there's also a problem of ideas. I very strongly believe that, in a lot of economic policy making, ideas actually are very, very important. I mean, all of us, I think, have certain ideas about, what is the good way and a bad way to run the economy. And just to give you one example, I think, in answer to the question, why can't we do that? I mean, one thing could be that there are lots of actually workers in this firm, and if you have exit, those workers might either lose their jobs or, have to find alternative occupations, and that becomes very difficult politically to address. But it could also, so that's a case where there are interests involved who prevent exit, but it could also be because, supposing you had a belief that, some small vulnerable people in this case, say, working in the fertilizer sector or the banking sector or in agriculture. Suppose you had a view that, you want to protect these people. And one thing protection means that you don't want them to lose their jobs. So, I mean, I'm not saying what is right, what is wrong. I'm just trying to explain and highlight what are the factors that determine how we think about these things and how that affects policy. So if you believe, in a state like Kerala, I think it's no secret that, the sense of solidarity with the vulnerable, with the poor, with the small is very strong, is very, very strong. And, many of your policies stem from that. And good or bad, I don't know. But it does determine, what the Kerala government has been doing over the years. And the same thing happens, all over the world, including in Delhi. And so, but I think, when you think about this going forward, think about all the situations where exit is so difficult. In your own lives, you will see how exit is so, we're all creatures of habit, and to exit from, I make a resolve, to eat less and, to lose weight, but it's very difficult to exit from that habit of, eating too much and not exercising enough. So it happens at all levels. Yeah. So agriculture is another topic that we focus some attention on. And see, there are a couple of interesting things about the Indian economy that we think that, the level of agricultural productivity in India is still relatively low. But one of the interesting things that I discovered recently was that, if you look at the last 2 years, we've had 2 successive years of droughts. Actually, given how bad the weather was, agricultural production didn't do as badly as you would expect given the drought. And that's what this chart is highlighting. This shows the average rain shortfall from the long period average. And this is food grain production. So essentially, this is an upward sloping line. In 2015, had we had this level of rain shortfall, we should have had much less production. We should have had a decline in growth of about 5%, and actually we had pretty flat growth. So despite all the challenges and difficulties, our agriculture is becoming less resilient, a little less resilient. But if you look at the next slide, agricultural productivity, we're still very far from the frontier. This is the gross value added per worker in Indian agriculture. And generally, we are here, and even China is about 3 to 6 times ours, Brazil, Europe, United States, because that every experience of international development where countries go from being poor to rich is always accompanied by agricultural productivity rising, and I think this would be true for India as well. Next slide, Raj. So here's, one interesting thing is that, this is agricultural output in China and India since 1960. Look how, for this period, it goes up and down, and it goes up and down both in China and India. That means that agricultural output has been very volatile in both China and India. But notice how in the last 10 to 20 years, Indian agricultural output goes up and down, whereas China's is much more steady. And so that shows that China has done something to actually smooth the volatility of agriculture, and they've done, whereas India, we still have some way to go on that. By the way, I want you to, this part reminds me, if you remember Professor Amartya Sen, he had a very famous comparison between India and China. Of course, he also had some things to say about Kerala, but on China and India, he made the very interesting observation that China, even after, it became, after 49, after the revolution, China had famines while India never had famines. So, but on the other hand, China provided basic health and education and avoided some, malnutrition, etc., much better than India did. And so his interesting insight was that there are some extreme events like famines that India is very good at avoiding, But when it comes to providing sustained delivery of services like health and education, China has done better than India. And why that's the case is very interesting. But his argument was that in a democracy, information flows very quickly, so that if you have an emergency, you're able to respond much more easily than in China, where in fact people didn't know about the famine for many, many years. You know, the Great Leap Forward, for example, I'm told resulted in 20 to 30 million deaths in China, which of course came out much, much later. But you know, because it was a repressed society, information couldn't flow, so they couldn't take emergency action. Whereas in India, we've been very good at that, and we had the Great Bengal famine before independence, but since then, we've never had famines because we're able to, you know, at least some things. Similarly, the way we responded to the tsunami was also an example of, you know, a very good emergency response by the Indian state, by the Indian government. But when it comes to, you know, on a sustained basis, providing good health, good education, good nutrition, good child care, you know, China seems to do better than us. That was just an aside. So, okay, so here's one example of the kind of work that we did on the fertilizer sector. So, you know, one of the jobs, I think, of the kind of work that we do as economists is that because they have to take into account, and often when they want to reform, this kind of evidence actually helps them a lot. So just to give you one example of the kind of, you know, work that my colleagues did. So we know that the fertilizer sector in India is a very kind of, there are lots of government interventions, and there are lots of outcomes that it leads to. For example, you know, we have overuse of urea, soil quality deteriorates, you know, cancer is very high in areas which use fertilizer a lot. And so what we did was we tried to get data to analyze the consequences of what all the things we do in urea. So one of the surprising things we found was that many policies that are supposedly implemented keeping the farmer's best interests in mind often turn out to be not the case. Often they turn out to be hurting precisely those in whose benefit we claim we are implementing these policies. Just to give you one example, you know, we calculated, my colleagues calculated, that all the things we do in fertilizer, in urea, creates a very big black market in urea. Because when you have all these controls and shortages, it leads to scarcity and prices go up. And then when this happens, it ends up hurting the small farmer much more than the large farmer. So, for example, we calculated here what percentage of small farmers pay black market prices and prices higher than the regulated price. So, 80% of small farmers pay much higher prices in the black market, and on average they pay prices that are about 40 to 50% higher than the price at which the government says they should have access to fertilizer. So this is how, you know, we implement a set of policies, but what happens is completely different, and we were able to actually show this, that, you know, you say you're helping farmers, but actually the small farmer gets hurt by this the most. And this is something that, you know, policymakers will have to take seriously. The other thing that we calculated was very interesting, that we give subsidy to the extent of about 50,000 crores in urea, 50,000. So we were able to calculate how much of that actually reaches the small farmer. Because remember, the policy is we want to help the small farmer. And if you're spending 50,000 crores, how much actually reaches them? And what we found was that out of the 50,000 crores, only 35%. So 2/3 of 50,000 crores either goes to very inefficient firms, or it gets diverted to other countries or other uses, or it goes to the large farmer. So if you can document this, if you can show this, this actually does make a big difference in being able to influence and change policy. So I think it's because of being able to do work like this that I find this job so exciting, you know, so interesting, because the scope to do work like this is just infinite in government, and you know, and it's just a matter of, you know, talking to people, getting the data, and coming up with this kind of analysis, presenting it to policymakers, which I think. So the other thing, you know, about the fertilizer regime, which is very interesting, is that, you know, we give subsidies to the fertilizer industry, and as you know, when you give subsidies to marginal farmers or women, pregnant women or children, you know there's something fundamentally desirable about that. But in this case, the interesting thing about the fertilizer subsidy is that the more inefficient the firm is, the more the subsidy it's going to get. So that's why we call it the perverse urea regime. Actually, when the cost of production goes up, they actually get more subsidies. And this is something that I certainly found very striking when I came to India, and started looking at this sector. So next, Anthony. Okay, so here's moving to another area where we did some analysis. So, when you run an economy, by and large, you're supposed to have one price for one product. So, supposing you want to go and buy a TV set, then, I mean, you want there generally to be one price. Everyone faces one price, and that's how most, markets function. But sometimes what we do is, we say, well, but there are poor people who should get a lower price, and rich people who should pay the regular price. And so sometimes we do that. It's not the most perfect solution, because remember, as soon as you introduce two prices, there will be black market, leakage, etc., because people will buy cheap and then they will sell it. In fact, in the case of urea that I just showed, because the price is very low, what happens in all the border states like Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Bihar, is farmers or the person who sells fertilizer, he gets it cheap from the government and he actually smuggles it across the border because prices are higher. And that happens because there are two prices. So you get all this scope for golmaal that goes on, but sometimes it's unavoidable because we want to protect the poor. But here is a situation in power, and this is the electricity tariff from a state that I will not name. It is the most recent electricity tariff, and what you find is something quite astonishing. This actually tells you how many different prices there will be for electricity in the state. I'm sure Kerala is no different. So let me give you an example of this. There is an item here which says that pisciculture and prawn culture, they will face a different electricity from a poultry farm, from a mushroom and rabbit farm. So if you have a mushroom and rabbit farm, you can go and say, give me this price for electricity. And give you another example. If there is a panchayat, you pay a certain price. If it's a municipality, you pay another price. If it's a municipal corporation, you pay another price. What is the difference between a municipality and a municipal corporation? I don't know. I honestly don't know. So how do we get things like this? So another example, a wetland farmer holding greater than 2.5 will pay something, but a wetland farmer holding less than 2.5 will pay something else. So this kind of thing goes on and on and on. Just think of, supposing I said to go and buy kerosene or to go and buy a TV, there would be 75 different prices depending upon who you are. I mean, it would be chaotic. You couldn't run an economy that way, and yet that's what we do in the electricity sector. So it's very, very complicated, very non-transparent, and we know that the reason this happens because of things that you and I can't talk about in public, that how come some people get lower electricity tariffs and how come some so in some ways if you think about it, we need to simplify this enormously. At most we should have 1 or 2 prices like we have in any other product, and then I think there will be significant advantages. I noticed that this is not having any impact on you. The less impact it has on you, the more I'm getting, roused into a passion of, why this is so important. But but maybe when you grow up, you'll realize that this is not something you should be doing. You should have at most 1 or 2 prices in every market. So this is the other thing which is very interesting about the power sector in India is that we claim we are one country, but it's astonishing how in the case of agriculture, in the case of taxes, and also in the case of power, electricity, we are actually completely fragmented. We are 29 different markets in power. So to give you one example, supposing you live in Kerala and you want to buy something which is available, say a suitcase from Chennai, it can come in because India is one country, But if you wanted to buy power from Chennai, you will have to pay an extra tax to get power from Chennai. It's called the cross-subsidy surcharge. So we have actually fragmented the Indian market in so many ways that make India not one economy, but many, many different economies. And we pay a huge price for that in terms of efficiency and, and the consumer gets hurt. So, for example, I think Kerala is a power surplus state, right? So this is a case where I think Kerala's interests and India's interests are very perfectly aligned because Kerala wants to sell power. But if you're a state like Tamil Nadu, which is deficient in power, to set up a plant to manufacture, say, textiles in Tamil Nadu, you'd have to pay something like, 8 or 9 or 10 rupees a kilowatt hour. And in addition, if you buy it from Andhra Pradesh or Kerala, you probably have to pay another 1 or 2 more rupees. So just think about how inefficient and high cost our economy becomes because of these kinds of barriers that we put. I mean, if we are one country politically, we must be one country economically. And in so many cases, we're not. And this is why I think what we're doing in terms of creating one market, whether it's the GST, whether it's the APMC, trying to bring all agricultural markets together, or creating one market in power, these are all very important policy reforms that the government is undertaking. Let's now maybe another 2 or 3 more topics, and next one now. Yeah, let's. Okay, so in fact, one of the big issues in India is how do we create jobs, and how do we create formal sector jobs, high-paying jobs, high-productive jobs. And we have a chapter in the economic survey on that. But one of the sectors, I think, which has a lot of potential to create jobs is the clothing and apparel sector. In fact, thanks to Dr. Thomas, I think after lunch, we're going to go and visit some textile factories in Kerala. And yesterday, when he received me at the airport, he very proudly said, we have a factory that employs 70 people. And in the scale of things, you need factories that employ 70,000 people. And so it's a measure of, how far we are in terms of creating efficient textiles and clothing. But it was very sweet, the innocence behind saying, wow, we have a factory that creates 70 people jobs. Whereas, so we have to create factories that, employ 30, 40, 50,000 people. And so one of the things that, we're going to focus on is how do you develop the clothing sector. And one of the really interesting things about the clothing sector is that if you look at Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, about 70 to 80% of the people employed in this are women. So I have to confess to a conversation we had on the way down. You see, one of my great hopes for Kerala, given that it's such an advanced state, that I thought gender relations would be much more equal here than elsewhere. But sadly, I find that, you know, all the stories that I hear are, you know, the men loitering and sitting at home, where the poor women toil, they teach, they come back and cook, and, you know, so we need to do something about this. You know, Kerala should be the beacon for other states, especially with the, you know, rich tradition of being matriarchal. Some societies are matriarchal. But in the case of Bangladesh and Vietnam, the clothing sector actually made a big difference in terms of empowering women. In Bangladesh, for example, because of the development of the clothing sector, women's labor force participation rose very rapidly. And Bangladesh has the distinction of having brought down its fertility rate dramatically, and much faster than people were actually projecting. I think it went from something like, I know you would be, you're the expert, something like 8, 9 to, you know, 2.5, 3 within the space of 10 to 15 years. And people thought it was unimaginable. But it happened, and of course there must be many reasons for that. But one reason was the fact that the clothing sector developed. Women started working, they acquired agency and power, and they made sure that, so I have to give you a good story as well. So I was looking in Delhi, went and visited one of the clothing factories, and I was talking to some of the women who come and work there. And there were some really good stories too. So some of the women who were working were saying that this has made a big difference to their lives. For example, they make the savings decisions, not the men, which I think is fantastic, which means there's going to be less alcohol consumption. But the other thing that they said was that because they're working and have power and are earning money, their husbands actually help them. So this one lady told me in the morning, I don't make chai anymore for my son or for myself because it's my husband who makes it for me. And when I come back home in the evening, my husband has chopped vegetables for me so that I can cook. I notice again this is having no impact on all of you women here. I take it's because your partners, your spouses are already cutting vegetables for you and making tea. Maybe if that's the case, all power to you. But if it's not the case, we need more clothing in Kerala. So anyway, so the clothing sector is a very interesting sector which we should develop, and it has huge potential for employing women. Next slide. And what is happening is that, you know, this is the share of China in clothing exports, and China is just dominating the world market, and we are somewhere here. Our share of global exports is about 5%. And if you look at this comparing India, Bangladesh and Vietnam, Bangladesh and Vietnam have overtaken us in this sector already. So we need to kind of develop this sector because it has a lot of employment potential, and as I said, a lot of potential for employing women as well. So this is a sector I think is going to be very important for creating jobs in India. Christ's College is so remote, you know, from very many places. I don't know whether that's true or not, but what is astonishing is that even for a place that's so remote, when you drive to come here, the quality of houses is just astonishing. I mean, I could be living in Washington, D.C., you know, where I've been living, and find houses like this. It's astonishing. So, of course, the obvious answer is remittances, and, you know, so this is a remittance economy. By the way, I'm not at all in favor of remittance economies in the long run. I'll tell you why. But please enjoy your houses meanwhile, but I'll tell you why. But the interesting thing is that what I want to say is that, you know, oil prices have come down sharply. Here you see, it's from about June 14, this is about 50 to 60% decline in oil. For a long time, this is remittances. For a long time, we didn't see a big decline in remittances because remember, if oil prices come down, the ability of these Gulf countries to absorb, you know, migrant labor comes down enormously. And remember, this 50% decline that's happened, it is not, or at least this is my considered view, this is not like in the past. Now, people think, most analysts think, that oil will never go back beyond 60, 65 for a very long time. So oil prices which were 80 and 100 and reached $147 a barrel, Now today it's about $48 or $47 a barrel. But it's not going to go very high because there's a lot of competition now for oil, especially from the United States, which produces something called shale oil, which is much cheaper than oil in many parts of the world. So this decline in prices of oil is probably going to be permanent, which means that all these Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, etc., are going to be slashing their spending. And at some point, it's going to affect remittances to Kerala. And see, as you can see, this is traffic, net traffic from Kerala. It goes up and down. There's no sign of any significant decline. But we're seeing the first sign of a decline in remittances in the last 2 quarters. It is coming down. So I suspect that over time, remittances to Kerala will come down and the net traffic also will probably slowly start coming down. So if I were in charge of managing the Kerala economy and I wanted to plan forward, I would certainly factor this in as a possible structural change to the Kerala economy going forward, which policymakers here have to take into account when they think about, where are the jobs going to come from, how should we create the conditions for creating jobs in Kerala. The whole, living on easy money, which is remittances, that era may slowly be coming to a close in Kerala, and that's something that I think policymakers will have to keep that in mind. So I want to give you 2 last topics, and then I'm going to stop because I'm, I think, running out of time. So supposing I were to ask you the question, does India tax too much or tax too little? It's a fascinating question, and I think that if I were to ask you, I think I would get responses on both sides, both that we tax too much and that we tax too little. And so we did an analysis in the survey on how do we answer this question. See, in all these things, one of the things I've learned over the last 10, 15 years is actually the answer finally matters less or doesn't matter more than the way you arrive at this answer. So I think that process of, doing the analysis to come at an answer is actually very important. And let me give you how we thought through this. So if you, next slide please, Anthony. So this table tells you what is the total tax rate in India as a share of GDP. And what you find is that actually India tax to GDP ratio is close to 17%, and it's much lower than many other comparable countries. For example, Brazil 36%, China 20%, Turkey 30%, and of course the advanced economies like the UK and the US are much greater. Scandinavia 50%. So if you look at the number 17%, you say, India taxes very little. But the question is that the right question? Is that the right way of is that the right comparison? Because after all, when the US and the UK were as poor as we were, how much did they tax? That is one way of asking the question. Not, so you can't compare a rich country and a poor country and say, tax rates are very different. You have to ask, what if you went back in time and said, how much did the US and advanced economies, how much did they tax at this? And you find that actually once you take that into account, India doesn't tax too little. India actually, because at a comparable stage of development, other countries were also taxing at similar rates. So that's one way of, next step. But then you say, but India is a democracy. Do democracies tax more than other countries? And the answer is yes, democracies do tax more than other countries. For many reasons. Democracies run welfare states, so they need more money, so they tax more. Democracies believe in helping the poor, so they tax more. So if you take into account the fact that India is a democracy, India does tax less than other democracies do. So notice, yes, it's too low, but if you take account of the level of development, it's not too low. But if you think of it as a democracy, it is too low. But then I can come back and say, hey, wait a minute, that yes, we are a democracy like the United States or like Europe, but even the United States and Europe, they actually increased their taxes. Why? They were a very low taxing country. They taxed actually, the big increase in taxes in the United States happened because of World War I and World War II and because of the Great Depression. So even if you take that into account, it doesn't seem that India is doing too badly. So I don't want to give you any one answer to the question, but what I want you to see is how should we think about even these comparisons? You know, who should we be comparing with? At what stage of development? And what history should you take into account when you make these comparisons? But it does turn out, next slide, so this is the ratio of voters to taxpayers, to income taxpayers. And it turns out that India is actually very, very low. So it's about the proportion of taxpayers to voters is about 4 to 5% in India. In most other countries, much greater. Now, why do I compare tax paying with voting? Bizarre. But actually not so bizarre. See, if you think about voting, voting is about what our political obligations are as a citizen of a state or a country. So you have the obligation, hopefully, you vote. Tax paying should be seen similarly as an obligation as an economic citizen of a country. We pay taxes because, something is done with these taxes that is good for all of us. And in fact, yesterday the Prime Minister, we had this big conference, I don't know whether you saw this in the newspapers, he addressed all the tax officials, tax administrators of the country. We were all there, and he gave a very inspirational speech. And, just to think about why there are taxes and why we should be paying taxes. I think that in a country, in a state where you have more income taxes, actually you get more connection between the citizens and the state. It leads to better accountability of the state because, when you tax, you say, hey, where's my money going? What value for my money am I getting? But I think in turn, and this is something that the Prime Minister also emphasized, that in turn, I think that it's one thing to, force people to pay taxes, but I think it's another thing to try and induce people to pay taxes voluntarily. And when would you pay taxes voluntarily? When you feel the government is giving you some value for your money. And I think, so just as citizens have an obligation to pay taxes, I think the government and the state has in turn an obligation to make sure that the money that they get, which is not the government's money, which is the people's money, to actually spend it in the best possible manner, provide greatest value, use it efficiently, less corruption, less leakage, and better services. So I'm going to, this is the last section I want to talk about. Just to give you a sense of, we did this calculation of, what is the amount we think, what we call the bounties for the better off. We did this calculation for what are the subsidies or incentives that the top 40% of the population get in these sectors. And if you add it all together, we come up with something like 75,000 crores. So I think when we think about subsidies, even our thinking needs to change. It's not just that we provide the poor with subsidies, we also provide better off people with subsidies and benefits. And so we should be even-handed in how we think about this. For? What is that? Yeah, so we've just calculated it for these 8 commodities. For other, if you take into account other commodities, it could be more. Next, I think this is something that I think is something that Kerala has made a lot of progress. We had a chapter called Mother and Child, and essentially what we showed was that when you think about government social programs or intervention programs like food subsidy bill, early child nutrition, improving schooling, providing teacher training, So when you look at all these interventions and calculate what their return is, it turns out that the maximum return comes when the government intervenes just before a child is born, i.e. in a pregnant mother, and in the first 1 or 2 years of a child's life. So if you were a government thinking about how to maximize the return for any intervention that you do, it turns out in the social sectors, the biggest rewards are when you intervene early in the life of a child, including for pregnant mothers. I think one of the things that surprised me was that I'm told that the average Indian woman, again, there's a lot of variation, so don't mistake me for that. The average Indian woman, when she begins her pregnancy, the average Indian woman, when she ends her pregnancy, has less weight, is lighter than the average African woman when she begins pregnancy. So when we have all these, issues relating to infant mortality, maternal mortality, the health of a child, how tall it is, how heavy it is, lots of these things can be addressed if we intervene early in the life of the child, including, and I think therefore, even something like Swachh Bharat and open defecation have a really important impact on the health of an infant and the health of a child. That's why I think that something like the Swachh Bharat scheme is such an important thing, not just from the point of view of general cleanliness, but also from the point of view of the health of a child and its long-run productivity. Because it's absolutely well documented that someone's productivity when he or she enters the workforce is crucially determined by the cognitive development in the first 1,000 days, and that cognitive development depends upon physical inputs, both for the child and for the mother that's feeding or that's carrying the child. So I think this is something that, it's a lesson, to be fair, I think Kerala has internalized for a very long time, and that's why I think this is one area in which I think Kerala has made a lot of progress. This is last slide, and actually, no, just go to JAM now, Anthony, please. Yeah. So I do believe that what this government has been doing on this whole Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile, creating this, bringing together these technologies is going to be one of the real revolutions in India over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And the passage, in the last budget, the Aadhaar bill was passed, and that's going to allow this to move ahead very rapidly with less legal uncertainty. And what this JAM is having applications in many, many sectors. Cooking gas subsidy, the food subsidy, the fertilizer subsidy, delivery of pension, delivery of other the Anganwadi program, ICDS. It's going to have enormous implications. And I was in Krishna district about a month ago, actually spending time seeing how these programs work, and the impact is just enormous. In terms of just the efficiency with which governments can deliver services to the poor. I mean, for example, in the case of the PDS in this district that we visited, after this JAM, with this Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile came together, I think the savings was like 30% just over the course of 6 months. So essentially wastage, leakage, duplication had been reduced significantly. So what it means is that then the government ends up having more money to spend on other things that are very important for the economy. So I think this is something, JAM is something that I think over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years is going to be absolutely transformational for India. And I think it's one of those, V.S. Naipaul had this phrase called the million mutinies about India, how there's so much churn and dynamism taking place, and I think JAM is going to be one of those million mutinies. So I think I've spoken far too much. Thank you very much for being very, very patient and attentive listeners. If I've put some of you to sleep, my profuse apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I invite Dr. M.A. Uman, sir, for giving a reflection on what we listen to now.
Dr. Aravind Subramanian, friends, he has shown that he is a wonderful teacher. He carried the whole account in so marvelously clear and pedagogical excellence. I have written something which of course will have reference to some of the things that are said here, but I am little bit provocative in the early part and give two suggestions at the latter part of my presentation. I am going to read, and as he said in his speech today, Kerala people have a solidarity with the poor. It is that solidarity probably makes me to make some observations. Let me read. Economic survey, as the professor has explained to you, may be considered as a report to the nation about the economic conditions of the country and serves as a necessary backdrop to the budget that presents the estimated pattern and priorities for the ensuing year. Generally, it has been a routine bureaucratic record of what occurred in regard to the major dimensions of the economy. That it can be made into a stimulating analytical document that you have now seen is well exemplified in the 2-volume economic surveys of the last couple of years. I can firmly say that the Economic Advisor's imprint is writ large impressively across the 2 volumes. In fact, the Economic Survey 14-15, in contrast to its counterparts in the past, asserts that its aim is, in quote, to provoke debate and discussions and thereby enriching the process of policy making, unquote. This is what I am also trying to do here. This is precisely what it should be. The present survey, 15-16, which he explained, it is claimed will, in quote, often inform, never pedantically instruct, unquote. But I have an uneasy feeling that this wise admonition is not always kept in the survey, and at least on quite a few occasions one can see unnecessary or avoidable display of knowledge. I hope this will be taken only as an impressionistic observation. The most important salience of this year's survey is that it makes its philosophy and values explicit. It is market-mediated growth with policy choices to make state leaner and to promote marketism without exit that he explained elaborately. No wonder poverty finds only a half-page reference in the survey. I believe that improving the lives that people live should be the ultimate goal, and growth at best has only an instrumental importance. In other words, building capabilities and fighting unfreedoms like illiteracy, ill health, insecurity, malnutrition, lack of equal opportunities, and so on, are more important than expanding economic growth per se. Given the alarming pathology of healthcare delivery in the country, the mounting out-of-pocket expenditure of lower households, the growing pricing out of the poor, how can you ensure, in quotes, accessible, affordable, and equitable quality health care, especially to the marginalized and vulnerable sections of the population, unquote. Given the increasing inequality in income and earnings from employment, the so-called JAM, which was very elaborately explained today, cannot be a strategic answer to alleviating poverty, which is a multiple deprivation condition. The survey piously hopes, in quote, transparency and accountability of flow of funds through technology intervention will bring in the desired educational and health outcomes for the population and pave the way for a healthy and educated India in the near future, unquote. To be sure, this offers poor comfort to the disadvantaged, especially because the share of health and education expenditure to GDP ratio of India is 3.4% lower than comparable countries in the world. This indeed is a reflection, I am only quoting from the survey, reflection on the performance of governments that ruled the country in the past and the priorities and policy choices they have pursued. I wonder, with 90% of economic activities taking place in the unorganized sector, how you can reap the full benefits from the demographic dividend you boast of, given the poor allocation for health and education. Will the future economic surveys outline strategies, measures, and resource allocations to rectify and improve the situation? Chapter 7, that was also very well brought out. I generally or mostly confine myself to chapter 7 now. In the first volume on fiscal capacity is an interesting one. I think the full potential of the chapter does not seem to have been translated into policy suggestions. This is only a remark. The economic survey raises the pertinent question. Does India have the right number of citizens paying taxes given its level of economic and political development? A very pertinent question. The evidence given show that India is the worst case of under-taxation in the world. I know his arguments he has given that under-taxation and under-spending could not be taken just like that, but I do not entirely agree with that. The evidence, 85% of the economy is outside the tax net. Only 4% pay income tax as against the potential of 23%. You might have seen that here. As estimated by the survey, India's tax GDP ratio at 16.6% is well below 21% of the average for emerging market economies, not to speak of the average for OECD countries, which is 34%. Nearly 5 lakh crore rupees had been admittedly conceded to the corporate sector by way of exemption. Equally important is the admission that the subsidies to the well-off is over rupees 1 lakh crore. Of course, the 76,000 part he explained. Finding that India underspends and undertaxes is an implicit admission that the ruling and past governments were not for the disadvantaged, whose upliftment requires critical minimum investment. While fully underscoring the fact that taxation needs to be seen as a participatory project It may not be out of place to note that India's parliamentarians and political class in general are not in favor of taxation and seem to labor under what may be called fiscal illusion. Fiscal illusion happens when government revenue are not completely transparent or are not fully perceived by taxpayers, when the cost of government is seen to be less expensive than it actually is. It is good that the growing economic inequality in the country is recognized in the survey. While the traditional revenue raising role and participatory and accountability importance of taxation is recognized, its role as an instrument of equitable distribution and resource allocation is omitted or downplayed. In particular, having brought in Thomas Piketty, box 7.1, the case for progressive tax instrument is stronger. Piketty has persuasively analyzed the causes of growing inequality, the role of paternal capitalism in it, and the need for progressive taxation to counter it, and so on. Relying on Beasley and Pearson, the survey maintains that, in quote, countries with a higher share of income taxes in total tax collections tend to have more accountable governments, unquote. My question is, do we have an accountable government by this reckoning? The answer is clearly in the negative. At this point, I must mention that it goes to the credit of Dr. Aravind Subramanian that he took the initiative to publish income tax data from 2000 onwards after 15 years of blackout. Needless to say, lack of transparency is a blemish on democracy. The survey makes an ardent plea to the states to expand their capacity and improve services following the quantum jump in tax revenue devolution to states to 42% from 32% recommended by the 13th Finance Commission. Having abolished the Planning Commission, plan grant stands abolished. Anyway, the discretionary domain of the center has increased. The political economy implications of this can have adverse consequences on center-state relations unless you introduce criteria-based allocations for non-statutory transfers. Also, the number of centrally sponsored schemes have been reduced to 29 and central support withdrawn in several cases. The Economic Survey warns, like the 14th Finance Commission, an evolution in the relative roles of center and states, the former focusing on policies and facilitating cooperative and competitive federalism. This shift ignores several realities of Indian federal finance. The story of underperformance in taxation and spending cannot be told from a high moral ground by the center, which is probably more guilty than the states, or equally guilty in tapping the revenue potential. Again, it is a fact that the center has restructured the grant transfers to the disadvantage of the states. The current funding pattern is 60:40 for non-special category states. This raises the resource share of states. Moreover, the center took away 8.1% of tax revenues in 2015-16 against 6.1% in 14-15 by way of surcharges and cess, which are non-shareable. The introduction of further cess and surcharges in the current budget would take away another 9.1% of the tax revenue from the divisible pool to the states. While conceding that the tax effort of states may not be uniformly good, No one can deny the differences in fiscal capacity and asymmetry which the Constitution recognizes, resource endowments, progress in developmental attainments, and the like among the states. Evidently, the focus of the survey on models and magnets, that is from the survey, can adversely affect the weaker states. To be sure, equity is the glue that binds diverse federal constituents together. My suggestion at this point to the Government of India and to the esteemed economic advisor is to institute a historical study to find out whether India is converging in terms of economic development and human development attainments or diverging before further policy choices are made for making the state leaner. Let me come to a suggestion which I consider. This is the main point that I want to impress upon the learned professor. Come to a suggestion which I consider when I come to the important part of the life. Which I consider important to place local finance as an integral part of the public finance of the country. I am surprised by the fact that the economic surveys have not mentioned local finance even after the 73rd, 74th constitutional amendment. It is significant to note that Article 280 of the Constitution that established the Union Finance Commission was altered as part of the two amendments. The additional subclause 283 BB and 280C mandating the Union Finance Commission to recommend measures needed to augment the consolidated funds of a state to supplement the resources of panchayats and municipalities on the basis of the recommendations made by the Finance Commission of the state affirms the organic link in India's multi-tier fiscal federalism. I am coming to a close. The 11th, 12th, 13th and 14th Union Finance Commission have collected data on the income and expenditure of the rural and urban local governments in India. But they have not attempted an integrated analysis of public finance. In context, I have written so much on this point. Public finance. Since the recommendations of the 11th Commission, some efforts have been made to rationalize. Can you hear me at the back? But it is enough that Dr. Subramanian here. Since the recommendations of 11th and the progress, however, has been very slow. 18 major states now use a software developed by the Ministry of Panchayat Raj called Kriyasoft. This is cash-based single entry system of accounting. Kerala and Karnataka use an approval-based double entry system of accounting far back as 2002. In a paper in the Journal of Economic Perspective, Pranab Bardhan wrote, quote, in general, the auditing process at the local level is extremely deficient, not always by design, but by the sheer dearth in the villages of technical capacity for accounting, record keeping, and auditing. Unquote. The situation probably is slightly better now, but the overall situation still requires drastic improvement towards evolving sound financial reporting system, which is consistent, comparable, and reliable. I repeat this, that India needs a financial reporting system of the local government in the whole economic survey as well as in the analysis that the Government of India makes in the future. Budget system at the panchayat and municipality level is in doldrums. I hope the esteemed economic advisor will initiate steps or at least appoint a local taxation inquiry commission which can put the situation in perspective and recommend measures for restructuring public finance, putting local finance in the fiscal map of Indian federal policy. Actually, this is, oh my God, when I am finished. I repeat, one, now that the discretionary domain of the central government has increased in the context of no planning commission and the reduction in the number of centrally sponsored schemes and raising the center state expenditure funding ratio to 60:40 in many cases. Why not we think of a criteria-based allocation of resources? That is number one. Number two is that the besides the criteria-based allocation, we should think, one point that was coming to my mind immediately evaporated. The point, the most important point is to put local finance on the public finance map of India. And restructuring of public finance in this fashion can happen only through the medium of the economic survey. And I suggest that local taxation inquiry commission, in fact in chapter 7, which he has not mentioned, there is a strong reference to property tax, an excellent reference to property tax, but without reference to local finance. In fact, there is a clear case for the economic survey of the future to have local finance put on the map of public finance. The last point is that another committee at least at the level of the economic advisor or the government of India may be appointed immediately before the next survey is finalized to find out whether India is moving towards convergence in regard to per capita income and human development attainments, or diverging. If it is diverging, it is time to sit back and reflect that this country needs more health, more education, more social security, more strategic intervention to prevent malnutrition, and so on. These are my suggestions. Thank you, Professor, for his excellent delivery and also for taking economic survey to the remoter part of India, including Irinjalakuda, which is not a very progressive, I'm making any reflection on you, but which is a remote part of India, and making this occasion memorable for the 29-30 colleges who have participated in this venture on behalf of the Kerala Economic Association. Thank you once more.
Thank you, sir. Next, I call upon Dr. Irudaya Rajan to say a few words on the same topic.
Again, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Aravind to come here, because this is something very great for the Kerala Economic Association. And as long as this is Dr. Aravind's day, because it is your day, I don't want to be part of, cutting your day. I would like some time he spends with you asking some discussion, but I would like to make one or two comments, then I'll stop here so that he spends more time with the students. You ask some question, he can respond for maybe 20 minutes at least. So I will limit to, because migration I'm not going to talk about today, because he said there will be a chapter on migration next economic survey. So,
I also have a chapter local government.
Okay, so there are 2 chapters already planned. So we don't want to, we're not going to discuss on that, but I would like to pick up 2 points which Aravind discussed here. One is about the quality of house. I think he talked about indirectly about remittances, migration, but he talked about the quality of houses in Kerala. In fact, whenever I go through from Trivandrum to Kasaragod, because currently I'm doing a survey throughout Kerala on migration, especially to look at the little bit impact on the oil crisis. And if you see any house which is a big house in Kerala, either it belongs to a household which has currently migrant or historically immigrant. Otherwise, this house is belong to the corrupted man in Kerala. So it's either corruption or migration. That is what happening in Kerala. So I think you should check exactly what's happening. So quality of house, you should look at it. Migrant or corruption. So you should look at that. The second... Where is the mic you can give? That mic if you want. Yeah, just, yeah.
So I take it that the next survey, the 2 policy recommendations should be increase corruption and make more people leave the country.
That's right. And the second point which I think which is important, I think I picked up today, because Kerala is already debating about exit. This exit I think is a very excellent point, because when I came to Kerala 30 years back, as a demographer, I came to CDS. And then I was thinking what I will do here. Because the fertility rate among the women is only 2 children per woman. What we'll do? Demographers have no job here. So I told the Professor T.N. Krishnan, you appointed us, what I will do? Because no fertility, children is pilot replacement, then what I will do? Then he told me, please work on old people's problem. Then I started thinking about old people's problem. Then I had a discussion with the planning board vice chairman around 1989, 90. I told him one day, I did a projection for Kerala. And the number of births in Kerala today is close to 9 to 10 lakhs. I'm talking about 30 years back. It will go at least next to 30 years, it will come to 5 lakhs. If this is what going to happen to Kerala as a demographic projection, because demography we can project very well. I can project when Kerala will be having negative growth rate, which we are already doing about that. So we did that. If the birth rate comes down, what will happen immediately? You have negative growth rate among children, which is now 0 to 14 in Kerala today. When I told the planning board vice chairman, as he rightly said, if you give them evidence-based, I think the policymakers are not, they are picking it up. And then he told me what we should do. In 1991, I sat closely in the meeting. If the schools are not viable, please close schools in Kerala, primary schools. This is, I told in a closed door meeting. And then I produced lot of document on projecting up to the district level, state level. That is where the concept came in Kerala called the uneconomic schools, which is being debated yesterday by the CM here, because many people even that time told me, you are asking them to close schools. Are you mad? I said, look, I am not mad, because 1971 Kerala achieved 100% enrollment among children. 100% in 1971, which is quoted in Caldwell in the PDR paper. If every children goes to school, when Kerala had number of children born 10 lakhs, many private people who started opening schools every streets. Like everywhere you walk around in some of the Kerala, either you see at every street you will see a temple or mosque or a church. You had a school everywhere. In every street there is a school. And then what happened? People are investing money because it is a better way to make your money profitable, education institutions. Then what happened when I was telling them, many people told me, Rajan, I find it is, I cannot run a private school because now it is, we are not getting children. Every parents have just one child, they want to put them in St. Thomas in Trivandrum. So St. Thomas people are queuing up, the government school, unaided schools, nobody want to go. So what happened in the process? Kerala government, the economic review in 1996, they had a section called uneconomic school in the first time in the history of the economic review. And we prepared data for them, districts-wise uneconomic school. It is there in the 20 years back. And then very many people cleverly closed schools. And then the government which was ruling at the time, they said, next government comes, it will be changed. Next government was very happy to implement it. They are go on allowing, please close the school. Anybody give a letter? Yes, please close. And now the debate has started now. 5 schools want to be closed by the people, but the government says we will think about that. Whereas the Secretary of Education rightly said, we cannot take over all the schools, which you rightly said, because it is unviable. There are children. You have 6 teachers, 3 children. Uneconomic schools. Where is the children? Because you can bring workers from other state to work for you. You cannot bring children from other state to study here. And especially children in the primary school. How do you do this? You can't do, because you have to have children here. You can bring workers, which everybody does, including Europe. So the fertility rate today is, you have such to 5 lakh children born every year. And last year 5 lakh, this year 4.5 lakh, 490,000, next year will be 460,000. And childless couples in Kerala is increasing. 1 out of 10 have no children. I told the Department of Family Planning in Kerala government, please close your department. And then they told me what these people will do. I said they are distributing condoms. They don't distribute. People will buy. Why do you distribute? Because there is no children. I think exit is a big issue in this country. Exit is a very big issue. I think you brought it very important, and Kerala is debating about uneconomic school after 20 years. Uneconomic school. I think Kerala has to think. You can't run a school with 10 children and 5 teachers. Whatever you talk about that. We are not propagating anything. Uneconomic school have to be closed. At what cost? We have to study. Government cannot take all the schools, because the private man told me, if I convert now an old age home, I will make more money than running a school. I can convert my school into a marriage hall. I will make more money. Why should I run a private school? Because it is not profitable. So we should allow them to exit. Like you given them permission to open school 30 years back when you had 10 lakhs of children and everybody want to go to school. Today you have only 1 child. Some people have no child. If you have only 1 child, you want to make them engineer, doctor. Everybody want to go to St. Stephen's. St. Stephen will close. What is the cutoff? 98.999. Then other colleges has to be closed. I am sorry about that. Thank you.
And so, now we have the house open for questions. Any queries or doubts can be raised to the chair. I will serve to present the awards for the best PhD thesis in the last 3 years. Dr. R. Santosh. Dr. Shaijan Davis. Of Dr. P.G. Thomas, authored by Dr. Ian Thomas. Dr. P.G. Thomas was the first Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Sri Aravind Subramanian will release the same and hand over the first copy to Reverend Father John Kottapalli CMI, Manager of Christ College. Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to call upon Dr. Yemi Woman, sir, to present the memento to Sri Aravind Subramanian on behalf of Kerala Economic Association. Aravind, sir, on behalf of Christ College. Also, I invite Thank you, sir. Of Kerala Economic Association was held at Farooq College. As an expression of gratitude, Dr. Ian Thomas, sir, would hand over the memento to Dr. Abdul Jafar of Farooq College. Now, I invite Dr. Ian Thomas, Secretary of Kerala Economic Association, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Very respected chief guest, Dr. Aravind Subramanian, our patron, Dr. M.A. Ummen sir, our president, Dr. Hriday Rajan, our prior and manager of this college, Dr. Father John Thottapalli, senior invited guests, respected teachers, and my dear friends. In fact, I am really delighted to stand before you to propose vote of thanks to one and all who are present here to make this function a grand success. In fact, I was after our chief guest, Dr. Aravind Subramanian, for the last 7 months. First, in order to give away the maiden Dr. P.J. Thomas Award to the doyen of econometrics in India, Dr. K.L. Krishna. But due to some official appointments, he could not heed your invitation. Then second attempt was to get him to inaugurate the second annual conference of Kerala Economic Association, Farooq College. And in that case, he almost agreed, but due to the graduation ceremony of his son, who is studying in USA, he had to skip the program. And then, this is the third attempt, and he happily agreed, and he has come over here and blessed us and delivered a very, very good and wonderful lecture. And he proved himself that he is not only a very good bureaucrat, but also an excellent teacher. And so he is, I can say, a bureaucrat and an academician all rolled into one. Moreover, personally, I am extremely thankful to him to release the third edition of my book on Dr. P.J. Thomas. So, on behalf of Kerala Economic Association and one and all who are present here, I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Aravind Subramanian. Next comes our patron and our guiding spirit, Dr. M.A. Ummen. Without him, this Kerala Economic Association would not have taken this shape. For the last 2 years, we had worked hard under his leadership and guidance. And so now we have reached the third year and a very active year, and this is our maiden attempt. And so I express on behalf of Kerala Economic Association and one and all who are present here, very sincere thanks to our role model, Professor Dr. M.A. Ummen. The growth of any association depends upon the type of leadership it has. And now our association had become so dynamic and energetic only because of the dynamic leadership given by our present president, Dr. S. Hriday Rajan. And almost all of you have heard his speech, and you have witnessed how humorously and simply he could convince all of you very serious and important topics. So on behalf of Kerala Economic Association and one and all who are present here, I express my sincere thanks. And next comes the management, principal and department of Christ College of Economics Department of Christ College. And under the leadership of my friend and former colleague, Professor P.R. Bose, they worked so hard for the last 1 week especially, and worked hard to make this function to take this shape. So from the bottom of my heart, I express my sincere thanks to my former colleagues and the students of Christ College in Irinjalakuda. And next comes our sponsors. We know without financial support, no event can be organized properly. And here I am so sincere to express my thanks to two two of my sponsors, namely ISAF Microfinance, Trichur, and KPL Oil Mills, Iringalakuda. So I express my sincere thanks to both these sponsors. And now, may I seek your permission to speak a few words about ISAF, who is the first institution who came forward to sponsor us. And you might have heard about financial inclusion. And it is one of the catchy words, and everybody speaks and writes volumes and volumes about it. And here, I must say that we have a very young, talented visionary among Keralites to do business with a fire in his belly. And here, his fire in his belly is to not to make profit, but to serve the poor by financial inclusion. So please remember, a man with a fire in his belly to serve the poor through financial inclusion. He started his venture in 1992 by distributing 3,000 rupees each to 10 poor women. And he told them to see dreams of Acha Din. Then he asked them to repay the loans rupees 70 per week. And all these women entered in different kinds of enterprises. Some bought cows, some goats, and so many other kinds of businesses. And all of them promptly repaid their loans. And now this company have a presence in 10 Indian states. And when he started, he was all alone, nobody to support him. And now this company have 250 plus branches with 3,000 employees. And the vision and the mission of the employees resembles that of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett always used to tell to his employees that you must work in my company not as workers but as owners. Again, he told to them that he wrote in one of his articles, if I was hit down by a truck in the highway, it may be a bad news for my family, but not to my company. And all these aspects could be seen in that young entrepreneur. And yesterday you might have seen in the newspapers, you have been receiving Scotch Award for financial inclusion. And I must introduce him to all of you because he is a role model to us. More than that, Dr. Aravind Subramaniam had told me that he can say, yesterday he asked me one question, how many apparel making units did you identify and what are the size of their employment? And then for the last 3 weeks, we worked hard to find out various apparel units. And we could find out, you can say, identify 4 units. And in the 3 units, the average number of employees enjoying the benefits of DBT schemes, nearly 20. And in one industry, in one unit, we could find 70 people. We were so astonished and we are so proud about that adventure. So I happily told him about that. And now you have all of you heard, you can say, how humorously he took our you can say opinions. And so frankly speaking, all our entrepreneurs are now shifting from Kerala to Tamil Nadu to start industries, all because of labor problems. In these circumstances, may I introduce before you a young entrepreneur who had overcome all these problems, and from August 17, his microfinance company is going to be inaugurated as a bank, small finance bank. So the person is none other than Sri Thomas Paul. And sir, can you please stand there? So he is a real role model to us because all these, you can say, inimical conditions, he has made a successful attempt in introducing financial inclusion through his institution. And next comes, we can say we have so many senior persons sitting in the front row, and all these persons
They were retired senior officials from Reserve Bank of India, State Bank of India, and such other institutions. And so I extend my sincere thanks to all these senior fellows who are always with us and who are always encouraging us to conduct such programs. So may I express my sincere thanks to these senior invitees. And then this program has been made a huge success because of the presence of 30 colleges, including Dr. John Mathai Center, and more than 60 college teachers, and more than 160 PG students, and more than 50 research scholars, hailing from Trichur, Palakkad, and Ernakulam district, only 3 districts, mainly from 3 districts, and we have 2 or 3 representatives from St. Thomas College, Pala, and Chennashiri, SB College, Chennashiri. So I express my sincere thanks to one and all who have made this program a grand success. So once again, I express my sincere thanks on behalf of KEA, Kerala Economic Association. So the next item, as you can say.
We give a big clap to Thomas. Yes.
Thank you very much. Soon after this lunch, soon after this program, and lunch is arrived here, and all of you must go home only after taking lunch. Then more than that, we have 25 copies of economic surveys here, and I think you can say each college can take 1 copy each, and you can keep it in your library for your students. Then, if anybody sitting here who till now didn't get an opportunity to join Kerala Economic Association, now we offer an excellent chance to join Kerala Economic Association and to enrich the economics students and research scholars community in Kerala. Thank you very much. Thank you.